It's pretty tough at the top of some of our major listed companies, with an executive exodus meaning many are without permanent leaders. Where are all the CEOs?
It feels like there's been a bit more of a wave, and I think if you look at the companies that have lost CEOs, it has been the ones that have been under a little bit of pressure, and it's probably putting it a bit lightly, isn't it? And there's been a bit more scrutiny from shareholders, which is fair, I think. We do need to hold management to account.
Sudden departures of chief executives have become commonplace this year. Fletcher Building's Ross Taylor, Ryman Healthcare's Richard Umbers, and the Warehouse Group's Nick Grayston all left linked to poor company performance circumstances. Fletcher's and the Warehouse have put internal candidates in as acting CEOs on an interim basis, while Ryman's chairman, Dean Hamilton, has taken the executive seat while its permanent search continues.
It's interesting, it has been a coincidence of CEOs going, isn't it?
Other moves include Simon Mander resigning from Metro Glass, David Mair from ScalaUp to lead Sanford, while SkyCity's new CEO starts later this month. Research from Craig's Investment Partners shows half of all companies listed on the NZX Top 50 Index have had a change in CEO since 2020. Those with the longest standing leaders are Mainfreight with Don Braid's more than 20-year tenure, and Serco with Darren Grafton's 15 years. Also Vector, Tourism Holdings, property developers Argosy and Precinct, Scales Corporation, Vulcan Steel, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, and Turner's Automotive Group. Craig's Investment Partners analyst Mo Singh ran the numbers on the leaders and says changes at the top were clearly required. Well, Mo, good to see you. Always good to be in TGA.
Yeah, welcome to the Bay. We'll turn the sun on for you.
You have, thank you for that. It's so good. But look, first question, where are all the CEOs?
Yeah, big turnover. And I guess this time, where we are in the business cycle, it's not totally surprising. And I actually was sort of running the numbers, and the average tenure in New Zealand for the 50 is about 5 or 6 years. So every year we lose sort of, 10, maybe 5 CEOs. So it's not unusual. It feels like there's been a bit more of a wave. And I think if you look at the companies that have lost CEOs, it has been the ones that have been under a little bit of pressure, and it's probably putting it a bit lightly, isn't it, to say a little bit of pressure. So yeah, it has been at that hard end of town for earnings that we have seen some exoduses.
Yeah, it certainly feels like 2024 is the year of the executive exodus on our market. What has led to that?
I think naturally the pressure comes on when you're not performing, and over the last few years, look at where the economy's gone. The last 6 quarters, other than population growth, we've had negative GDP if you look at it on a per capita basis. So the demand's down after a wave of euphoria, sort of 2021, 2022. So it's been a tough place to be a CEO, and I guess some of those that have been around for 3 or 4 or 5 years have sort of looked at that and gone, geez, things are getting tougher. And there's been a bit more scrutiny from shareholders, which is fair, I think. We do need to hold management to account and boards to account. You've seen that come up in lots of media more recently. So I think it's partly natural, but probably been expedited by poor performance from some companies.
If we look at the ones that were certainly linked to poor performance, you've got the Warehouse Group and also Ryman Healthcare. What was it about perhaps the misallocation of capital and the decisions that were made in those companies by those leaders that you think made their situations effectively untenable?
Yeah, I think the hard thing has been the matching of resource to demand over the last 4 or 5 years. We had this real boom in demand, and it was hard for people to gear up and provide for that. And then as you started to finally provide for that, you resource up, all of a sudden demand's fallen through the floor. So you've had this real mismatch, and I think that's where a lot of companies in New Zealand have been found out a little bit is, the demand's come off massively and really fast. We haven't seen interest rates go up this fast for a long time. So that's where the trouble has been, that the allocation of resource has been slow and companies just haven't been dynamic. And then I guess in the case of someone like Ryman, it's been more than one thing. Debt got a little bit high, the cost of that debt went high, people weren't able to sell their homes through that COVID period, and it was tools down, so you couldn't keep building. You had huge amounts of construction projects that were basically ground to a halt. So it's never one thing, is it? It's always 3, 4, 5 things. But regardless, we expect our management teams to navigate through that. That's why they're paid pretty handsomely for, and some of those have done better than others, and in that sector Somerset seems to have done reasonably well, so you can't say it's been a sector-wide problem for the whole part. Some of it has been down to mismanagement.
To sum that up then, it kind of seems like ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, caught them out.
Yeah, and maybe it's a harsh to say there was a bit of complacency and laziness, but clearly I think what caught them out was that zero interest rate and then the firing to 5.5%, and we've held it here. And there's lots of calls now for that to get cut over the next little while because the economy is clearly in a lot of strife. But I think it's just been the acceleration down to zero, and then the acceleration up to 5.5% has been really, really quick. And with that, the dynamics of demand and pricing power have moved quite quickly. You could put prices up as a business to whatever you almost wanted a couple of years ago. You try to do that today and customers will walk out the door. We're seeing that in terms of volume demand come down. So I think it comes down to people that have been dynamic and able to cope with that. Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, I reckon, is a classic example of that. Fantastic management, great company, our biggest, but demand went through the roof for them through that COVID period, and costs also went up because they were trying to ramp up, and they sort of took some of those costs on the chin, and then demand fell quite quickly because you had this oversupply or inventory stocking, but that company has navigated those periods quite well and is coming out the other side and has been a silent performer this year, up 25%. So it can be done even from our biggest companies, but when it's not done, we end up at the other end of the spectrum.
But how about also the use of that financing? Some of these companies were paying dividends off debt, the case of Ryman, for example. You've also spoken to me previously about other companies that haven't done that and it's paid off for them, like Gentrack. So can you talk to me about the kind of difference in the use of debt that we've seen coming out of the cycle on the companies on our exchange?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one. When things are going well, you want to take on more debt and try and grow and make use of that opportunity. So there's a real balancing act. You can't be scared of debt, and Don's a classic at Mainfreight who gets grumpy with us for saying he's got a lazy balance sheet because he's conservative.
Rod Duke at Briscoe's too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and look, for more cyclical businesses, we don't want them to take on a lot of debt, but for those that have got good stable demand profiles, we do want them to use that debt to turbocharge growth opportunities when they're there. What we don't want to see is, like you say, is using taking with one hand to pay with the other. So using debt to pay dividends is not a great outcome. But and now you're seeing some of those companies get caught out where they took on a lot of debt and now the cost of that debt has doubled or tripled in some cases quite quickly, and you haven't been able to grow your earnings to keep up with that. Not dissimilar to a mortgage, right? So that pressure is coming on. I think it's just, again, comes down to being ready for a rainy day, and the good companies are always ready for a rainy day by having a balance sheet that's not too stretched at any point in time. And the classic for the capital markets in New Zealand, Maddie, is why are you listed? You're listed because you have access to free capital quite quickly. Not free, but easy access to capital. Auckland Airport, borders shut down, they raised over $1 billion quite quickly.
In New Zealand too?
In New Zealand, many companies, Aussie was all over the show through that period, and it worked well for listed companies. So there is a place to do that when you need it, but I think it's those that are prudent get rewarded with easy access to capital, and those that haven't been prudent and then come to market simply to pay down debt, it's not rewarded that well. Infratil's a classic example. More recently, raised over $1 billion like that. Quite easy to do when you can show what you're using it for, and it's for growth, not, hey, we've gone too hard on debt and now we need to pay it down, can you give us some money to do that? So it comes down to what are you using that equity for, I suppose.
You mentioned earlier that you think it's a good thing that shareholders have clearly increased their scrutiny of our major listed companies, but it kind of also feels a bit to me like board members, especially chair people, are getting a bit more ruthless. Is that a correct assumption, and do you think?
I think boards have a little bit more onus on them these days, don't they? They've got a bit more skin in the game, I guess, around scrutiny and their own liability. So I'm not saying that wasn't the case with board members before, but you are seeing, and there's probably a bit more public pressure. Fletcher Building is top of mind at the moment around the amount of pressure going on there. So I always think about particularly board chair people and the CEO of a company, kind of in the sports analogy, that's the coach and the captain, right? So those two have to be in sync, and they kind of one and the same almost. Scott Robertson and his captain have to be really in sync, and so I think that's translating into listed companies where if the CEO is performing poorly, then scrutiny comes on first the chair and then the wider board of who have oversight over the management team. So I think it's probably fair, and so I think now you're seeing those boards and those chair people put a bit more acid on their management teams to say, hey, we need to perform, otherwise we all feel the pinch. And who are the boards representing? They're representing shareholders. So I think it's welcomed and great that we are seeing a bit more of that pressure.
In the case of Fletcher's, we are yet to get a chairman replacement announcement. In the case of Ryman and the Warehouse, we're yet to get permanent CEO replacement announcements there too. What does that say to you about succession planning and perhaps how poor it is, the fact that these immediate replacements have not been found or at least announced yet?
Yeah, it's funny. I've sort of thought about this in the past, so it's interesting it comes up today is, we've had, there's kind of two types of, if a company's doing well, then almost always the promotion to CEO comes internally, and when a company is doing poorly, all of a sudden there's a call to clear the decks and look externally. And I think that's the difference you're seeing here is, Goodman Property Trust, James Spencer's just taken over there. Scalar David Mair, who was CFO for many years, has taken over. There's lots of these examples. Neil Barclay at Meridian was originally the CFO, has come into that role. So companies that are doing well, you want to keep that secret sauce. Fisher & Paykel Healthcare with Lewis Graydon taking over from Mike Daniel. You want to continue that legacy and that secret sauce for those companies that are doing well. Companies that are doing poorly, it's the market sees that as, well, hang on, someone who was in the tent to begin with, you're promoting them and giving them a go, but were they not part of the problem? So you are seeing, I think, that's the differential here, the Fletchers and the Rymans and so forth, is something's fundamentally gone wrong here. We'd like a new, fresh set of eyes, or many fresh sets of eyes, to kind of see where things are at and clear the deck. So that's why I think it's taking a little bit longer at some of those more troubled businesses at the moment. So
the big question then, I guess, is where do these boards get these fresh sets of eyes from?
Yeah, well, we get the generic answer every time, don't we, is there's an international search going on, and I'm sure there is, but I think the key it comes down to is these boards need to probably, and I'm sure they do, so I'm probably being a little bit unkind, but think about what is it that creates that secret sauce for a particular company. And it's not the same for every business, right? Every sector is different, but that's probably the thing we've been asking a lot of boards of late is, what are the things what are the attributes you think are most important in this business? For a Ryman Healthcare, is it to have, a real health background and a care background, or is it a development background?
He said development, right?
Yeah, so that's the classic there, right? Is what is it that you're actually looking for that you think the business needs over the next 3, 5, 8 years? And that's where, I don't know where you find these people. You magic them up out of somewhere. You can't find Greg Forans everywhere that come back from being, superstars around the world and want to run a New Zealand business. So we are a small pool. Yes, we can look internationally, but there are some big businesses looking for those same high-profile CEOs as New Zealanders. So there are very good CEOs in New Zealand and very good management teams, but it's about aligning, what the business needs with those same, attributes that a new CEO has, which is hard to get right.
Do you think, Mo, maybe then it's going to have to be a case of board members in these CEO searches having to be a bit more selective on certain skills, basically agreeing that they're not going to get a jack of all trades who can look over every part of the business well?
Yeah, and I don't know that they should be a jack of all trades. They should be time and place. What does the business need at that point in time? And if I come back to that rugby analogy again, it's not just the captain that's going to make the team. It's going to be, having the best forwards, the best backs, so you've got to have a team around them. And part of that is probably giving your chief executive and your CFO, because I think those two should work as a team and be, your captain and vice captain, but giving them free rein to gather the troops around them that they need and they think they want. And that's where it comes back to that clearing the decks, and is that you can't bring a CEO in but keep the same management team right the way through. They've got to stamp their own mark and have the people that they trust. And So that's probably, I think the jack of all trades is probably the wrong thing to do, is get the person you want to build culture, lead from the front and have a strategic brain, and then, empower them to bring the right people into the business to grow it. Because, you don't expect Greg Foran at Air New Zealand to understand how the mechanics of planes work or the engineering or any of that stuff. He relies on somebody to do that. So it's just a matter of getting the right person at the top who can delegate and, trust the people around them.
How should shareholders in New Zealand feel about the fact that there is such a lack of permanent leadership at some of our biggest, most critical companies? Or perhaps there's a positive spin on it here, Mo, and we're about to get some fresh blood into these companies, and it's actually an exciting time once they're appointed.
Yeah, I'm going to take the glass half full approach. I think it's actually, shareholders should be happy about that, because the last thing we want to do is be disgruntled and then not see change. So the fact that we are seeing those levers pulled, change come in, and remember, even when you see a fresh CEO, that doesn't mean that they've suddenly just come out of university and we've thrown them in the deep end. Kerry at Auckland Airport, who's been there a couple of years now, has come from a 20+ year career at Air New Zealand, so lots of aviation experience. So people that get promoted to these roles have years and decades of experience behind them. It's just about choosing, I think, the right people for that point in time. But as a shareholder personally, and obviously here at Craig's, we see that as positive. The change is a good thing, because we see that boards are not scared to make the hard decisions, and we are seeing progress in the right direction when things have gone off track.
Maybe the solution could be throwing some young bucks in the race. I mean, look at Zespri. Jason de Break, the new CEO as of this month, is 36, which is young by CEO standards.
Absolutely. He would definitely be at the younger end of town, and that's not a problem at all, right? But I think, it comes back to your earlier point of, that internal promotion. That's what I think we should really see, because the best companies in New Zealand that have endured all seem to have that internal promotion, and it is the CFO or the Chief Operating Officer or someone like that who has moved into the Chief Executive role. They've learnt from someone who's very good and kept that secret sauce. That's what I think could work really well. Port of Tauranga here, as we sit, classic example, Mark Hens was a star, and now he's on a number of directorships. But
maybe the next chair of Fletcher's, perhaps.
Well, yeah, I think he has thrown his head in the ring, or he has at least shown interest. I don't know where that's gone, but that's a classic example here of someone doing a great job for a very long time, and then someone stepping in, internally and moving into that role. So I think we should see more of that internal promotion going on in New Zealand.
You mentioned the likes of Don Braid at Mainfreight, and he is, according to your research, the longest standing managing director or CEO on the market currently. Serco also, with the CEO there, Darren Grafton, sitting in that seat for more than 15 years. Yeah. Does tenure matter in these instances, or is there perhaps also a danger to it? That kind of looks like perhaps there's not enough succession planning going on.
Yeah, I think it can work good and bad, and if I'm going to get crossed off a few Christmas lists. But think about Sky TV before Sophie Maloney turned up. We a long tenure with John Follett, and possibly too long towards the end of that. So there are risks, but I think most investors would like Don to be CEO or managing director forever.
I think Don would like that too.
Yeah, he'd probably like to live forever. From an investor perspective, we would, because he's done a great job. So, is there risk? I think, the things. It's not just about tenure. It's sort of having some experience in the right industry, and a big one that we sort of forget is skin in the game. Has someone come in as a hotshot CEO from the other side of the world who doesn't know the industry, doesn't really know the Kiwi psyche, all of that stuff, or have they grown up with the business? Do they own shares themselves? Is their remuneration somehow linked to what is best for shareholders? Total shareholder return through better performance, all those sorts of things. That's where I think boards can do more. And we are doing more. We're seeing a lot of that. Is the right type of remuneration packages for executives to get them more aligned to what is best for all shareholders and all stakeholders. So that's where I think we can see a little bit more nuance, but that longevity is great. It's good to have some of that longevity, because we've got plenty at the other end of town where they've just turned up as CEOs. So a bit of balance, and I'm too scared to say that Don's been there too long.
In the case of remuneration, though, that's a really interesting point, and perhaps
Yeah.
let's finish there. Because these CEOs are in such hot demand, numerous companies need them, hence why we're having this chat in the first place. Are they going to be able to demand a much higher price?
Oh, I think that, it's again comes down to specific examples, but they're reasonably well remunerated, I think, in New Zealand. My point really is have a attractive base salary and then have, targets that you can hit that will pay you well if you hit those targets because the business does well. We grow employment, we grow, the tax base for New Zealand, all of those great things that New Zealand Inc. needs as well. If we can get our leaders to come along for the ride for that, then yeah, absolutely reward them and incentivise them to do that. The other thing we probably don't see enough in New Zealand is target setting by companies, and Turners is a great example. I mean, that's a business that shouldn't be doing well in a tough economy, but is doing really well. Todd Hunter there has, and Aaron, his CFO, they've done a great job of setting targets for profitability 2, 3, 4 years out into the future to give a line in the sand and a bit of something to aim for, and they've managed to hit those targets for the most part. And we're seeing less and less of that in the listed space where companies are coming out, and I'm not sure, maybe that's because us analysts are being difficult to them and holding them to account too hard, but more target setting and more sort of aspirational numbers out there for everyone to sort of get behind and know where the target is, I think would go a long way to building
Maybe
a
we
bit
might
of that
start to
culture
see
as well.
in New Zealand some Elon Musk total shareholder return pay packets.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think his pay packet is probably bigger than most of our market combined, so I'm not sure we'll get to that, but always interesting to know what's going on in Elon's life. I don't know how you spend that kind of money, to be honest.
It'd be nice.
It wouldn't hurt.
Thank you so much for your time and for this insight. It's been awesome, Mo. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. Thanks for watching Markets with Madison. If you enjoyed this interview, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. I do all of the research for these episodes myself, so your support means a lot. I always love to hear your feedback and ideas, so please drop any thoughts in the comments below. Now go put your money to work.